Thank you, everybody, for joining us for a fun conversation today. Cyber Leaders Group Chat, Hot Takes, Real Talk. We have three of Data Prize's cybersecurity experts here to reveal the hot takes and real questions they are sharing in their secret group chat. And we have a great discussion ahead, but before we start, I do have some housekeeping items to cover. So, first, today, conversation is going to be completely unscripted. Our aim is to keep it a little bit shorter today, about 30 minutes, but if the takes get too spicy, I can't promise anything. Second, this webinar is being recorded, and you will get a copy of the recording and the slides after the event. And lastly, all of our attendees here are in listen-only mode, but there is a Q&A function, so you can enter questions as we go, or you can enter your own hot takes in there, and if we have time at the end, we'll see if we can get to some of them. With that, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers, three of the smartest people in cybersecurity. First, we have Nima Kamushi. He is Data Prize's Chief Information Security Officer. Then we have Tim Miller. He is Data Prize's Associate VP of Cybersecurity, and Martin Badinelli, Director of Cybersecurity Advisory at Data Prize. Between them all, I think we have about 1 million years of experience in cybersecurity. And I know that all three of them are not afraid to have bold opinions. So we are in for a treat today. And I'm excited to be the moderator for this session. My name is Stephanie Hamrick. I am the Senior Marketing Manager at Data Prize. So next, I'll tell you just very quickly about Data Prize for those who don't know us. We are a national managed services provider. We recently won MSP of the Year at the MSP 501 Awards from Channel Futures, which is very exciting. We've been providing IT services end-to-end for our clients across the United States since 1995. Our mission is to use technology to enable our clients to be the best at what they do, so we deliver best-in-class managed services like help desk, network, infrastructure, collaboration, and end user solutions to help you get there. And that, of course, also includes cybersecurity services, where we have world class experienced people and certifications. And some of those world class people are the three we have on this call. So I'm excited for all of you to get to hear from them. I'm not going to read this whole slide to you, but we will be sharing the deck and the recording after the session if you want to read more. So, with that, let me tell you a little bit about how this session is going to play out today. So, we have four main sections where we've curated a number of hot takes that we'll have our experts here respond to. Again, completely unscripted. As I mentioned near the top of the hour, we are going to try and keep this to 30-ish minutes for you all. So if we start running long on any one section, we will switch to more of a lightning round style until we get to the next category, so we don't end up spending all of our time on a few topics and we get to cover the full spectrum here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring our panelists up here onto the stage. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, hello.
For having us.
And we are going to hop into our first section, which is going to be culture before tools. So strong security doesn't start and stop with all those expensive tools everybody wants to buy. And our first hot take for this section is you need to stop worrying about next gen security tools if you don't have an effective and measurable end user training program. This one I'm going to hand off first to Martin. Martin, tell us how you feel about this one.
Yeah, I think that we here at Data Prize, we're constantly having calls with leaders of client organizations, whether we're servicing them or not. And, a frequent discussion, particularly over the last year and a half, has been, AI enhanced tools, the risks associated with leveraging AI tools. And that can even be something as simple as, you know, a chat GPT subscription, and I'm worried about people putting data into that. And in my mind, you know, and the data backs it up, that the largest single risk for any organization are their people. I think I saw it last week that CISA recently posted that 90% of breaches last year started with phishing emails. And so while it's super boring and very easy to say that people need to go do their, security awareness training, many compliance frameworks or security policies mandated annually, you know, that's in my mind a bare minimum. I've been part of organizations where senior leaders weren't doing their training and they were getting, an exemption because they were overly busy or they're very important. Those are terrible practices. And, making sure you have an effective security training, I view as the single most effective tool or process you can have in making sure your organization is secure. And that's whether, you're a solo operator just founding a startup or a Fortune 500. The most risky part of your business is the people.
That was definitely a hot take in there. Your leaders do not deserve to have exemptions from security awareness training. I like that. Tim, Nima, anything to add?
I'll actually take the next step from what Martin was saying. When leadership has that attitude, it's super common that there's no measurement of the effectiveness of the training. And so what you have there is an organization that will say have a compliance requirement that training is done every year. They roll out training, but it creates a culture of this is a checkbox activity that I just have to get done instead of paying attention and learning something from it. In which case, the end result is likely to be people click on things they shouldn't click on in emails, and they don't see the signs that they should be looking for. So yeah, I think measurement is super important as part of that. Otherwise, if you as an employee don't see that your management cares enough about something to measure it, then you're not going to care.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I think that's right. I think the other thing that we think of a lot is it's not just the leadership kind of commitment portion of this, but also we can have the best security in place, but if we've got users that are not trained and knowing kind of what to do about it, it can be problematic for us, right? So we can stand up all the right layers of protection, we can do all the right things, and if we got somebody who's a clicker, like they're going to start letting the bad guys in, and that's going to be a problem for us. So we've got to be real thoughtful about not just kind of addressing kind of the technical pieces, but also kind of more of the organizational and people and training pieces also.
Yeah, I kind of like we should start calling people clickers, and they have to prove that they're not clickers through the awareness training.
It's definitely something the security guys get excited about when we're sending our tests, like our phishing tests and everything else.
Hmm. Awesome. So let's move on to our next hot take here. Dashboards don't resolve incidents. Operators with context do. AI should feed them and not replace them. I'm going to hand this one to Tim first. Tim, what do you think?
Um, I I actually think that the dashboard is widely used, but not particularly useful. An example that I like to use when we look at metrics like this is there are organizations that the analysts are rewarded simply for based on the number of tickets that they close, for example, right? So their motivation is to close the ticket, not to perform a deep investigation and and to try to like knock multiple dominoes down with one move, right? So like they find an attack that's occurring, and then that can be fed back into the controls in order to help prevent further attacks. So it's just yeah, it's super important that the culture in the security teams is on that, not being rewarded by just raw metrics that are not significantly meaningful, but doing that next deep dive and getting into, as the slide says, the context of what occurred.
Hmm. Nima, Martin, anything to add?
Yeah, I think what one of the things that's happening out in industry right now is everybody is super fearful because they're like, oh my gosh, the AI is going to just replace everybody, right? If you see the stuff on the news, they're making it very like, oh, this is the end of everything that we kind of know it. And the reality is this is going to be like computing, right? So when computers were introduced, the people and the companies that started to leverage computers and be more effective with them, they were the ones that excelled. The ones that didn't, they kind of fell by the wayside. This is going to be the same thing. Those companies that start to leverage the AI and integrate it and understand that you've got to have both the human and the AI components, that's who we're going to start to see really excel over the next little bit. So I think as we do that, what's going to happen is we're going to address more of this really heightened kind of context that we're talking about, where you're going to have one person that can now do the job that 10 people could have done before, because they're going to be super effective and efficient at it in a way that we just couldn't have been without the technology. And I think it's the same thing with computers, right? In the old days, you would have to send a document across country to get it redlined. Now you can do it in a couple minutes over email with a phone call. So it's a very, very kind of different model.
Yeah. Martin.
Yeah, nothing to add from me. I think they covered it.
Awesome. So then we are going to go ahead and move on to our next section here, controls and configuration. So what are those habits that are secretly, or maybe not so secretly, holding your security program back? And this one, I'm going to hand over to Nima first. So your riskiest 0-day is probably a SaaS misconfiguration. What do you think, Nima?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. This is still as true today as it was, 10 or 15 years ago. We regularly see that one of the ways that the threat actors are able to get into systems is through just common misconfigurations. Somebody may be looking at a piece of software for the first time, maybe they're learning it, maybe they don't know, maybe they didn't have security looking at the system settings. There's a lot of different reasons why it happens, but we see kind of a real common theme where a lot of the threat actors are able to get in through just common misconfigurations in the systems. Over the last kind of, I'd say 60 to 90 days, we've also seen a trend from a lot of threat actors where they are not only looking for the misconfigurations, but they're targeting some of the VPNs that are giving kind of remote access to a bunch of people. So they're bringing both those pieces, the misconfiguration and the specific threat around the VPN, to try to break their way directly into systems. So it is a real threat, and it is something that they're actively kind of exploiting right now.
Awesome. Martin, Tim, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that maybe even going a step further, I'd say that like this connects back. All this stuff sort of connects, right? Your security folks, or your broader organization not being efficiently trained on new tools or software solutions means that they're not configuring things right. Not taking things seriously, to Tim's earlier point, at the executive level means you aren't doing annual configuration reviews or some sort of vulnerability or penetration testing. And all these things, hopefully they don't have consequences, but I think that we see time and time again in our incident response team that they do, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would just add that it's a super common misconception, unfortunately, in the industry that, Azure is secure, AWS is secure, OCI, whatever, pick your hyperscaler. And the thing is yes, they're all super, super secure, but they don't configure security for you. So when you deploy something in that environment, it's your controls that determine the security to your data. And I think there are still, if you go look at the news, you'll find GitHub misconfigurations responsible for a lot of stuff. You'll find, blob storage buckets available for a lot of stuff, and it's misconfiguration. It's not that those hyperscalers are insecure. It's that when those resources were deployed, they weren't configured properly, and that's like leads right back to the SaaS misconfiguration being the source of it.
Stephanie, one of the things that we see a lot too is equipment will get deployed the way that Tim's talking about, but what won't happen is that security hardening that's required, that doesn't get built into that system by default, right? And it's kind of like trying to bolt something on instead of having it built in and baked in from the beginning. It's a lot of extra work and it becomes complicated. And then those types of mistakes lead to a lot of the configuration problems that we're kind of talking about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so we are going to go ahead here and talk about our second one. We are going to switch to the lightning round model on this one. So we're going to try and keep our answers. We'll do round robin, one sentence or less. This one I am going to hand to Martin first. So MFA is a control to be attacked, tuned, and verified, not a checklist item to ignore after you've implemented it. Martin, what do you think?
Yeah, I think if you're not familiar with MFA bombing, which is essentially, if you get a pop-up on your phone that says approve here, attackers are doing a very rudimentary attack these days where they're essentially flooding you with requests. It pops up 300 times, and users are just tapping yes to make it stop, and that gives an attacker access, and that's a fault of configuring your MFA provider to not allow that sort of excessive amount of requests, as well as an issue with training people that when something like that happens, it's time to call the security team and let them know that somebody's actively trying to gain control of your account. So definitely agree.
Tim, Nima?
At the risk of sounding like somebody who provides managed cybersecurity services, this is a particularly important, more generalized thing in my mind, in that all security controls need to be constantly tested and maintained. That no security control should be set and forget. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, the short piece I think on it is that you have to have MFA these days on all your systems. If you don't, it is inevitable that you will be compromised. There's no doubt at this point. Again, in the old days, you used to be able to put security in place, and it was kind of just taken care of, and then attackers couldn't break into it because it was really difficult. Now, with some of the new capabilities that are out there, you have to have MFA on everything. To Tim's point, it's most definitely not a set and forget.
Yeah. All right, and just like that, on to our third hot take here. This one I'm going to hand over to Tim first. So, your endpoint strategy is really your identity strategy. Treat it that way. Tim, what do you think? And just a reminder, we are still doing lightning style. So, give us your answer as quickly as possible.
The concept of the perimeter just doesn't exist anymore. It's plain and simple. With all the work from home, all the SaaS, putting everything behind a firewall and feeling safe and secure, just it doesn't work anymore.
Nice.
I don't think I have anything to add.
Yeah, I think endpoint security is kind of critical. Again, when we've got everybody working remotely, you've got to have it, again, use that defense in depth layer approach.
Awesome. All right, so we are going to move on to our third section here, which is testing and metrics. I want everybody in the audience, you got to be honest with yourself. Do you have vanity metrics going on in your security practices? We are going to help you figure that out. So our first hot take, I'm going to hand this one to Martin first. Annual pen tests are compliance theater. Quarterly retests actually change behavior. We can back off from the lightning style now in a new category. Tell us what you think.
Sure. I mean, certainly in my career, I've been part of annual penetration testing for dozens, if not hundreds, of clients, and I would be lying if I say that it's not infrequent that we don't test and see literally 100% of the exact same issues as the prior year. And most of the time, there's nothing critical there. The critical stuff tends to get remediated as a function of some sort of insurance requirement. But you're sitting on the same version of an outdated firewall for a year. I think to Nima's earlier point, I think the fact that you haven't been breached is at that point just luck. So certainly, it's not just about testing; it's about taking action and then retesting to make sure that you've closed those security gaps.
Tim, Nima, anything to add?
I think I would tie this one also though back to the culture a little bit, in that my advice to any execs out there is, your company is having a pen test done, your quote annual compliance pen test. um, Ask your team, how did we do on the retest?
Yeah. One thing I've noticed too, and I don't want to say this is a rookie mistake, but this is a little bit of a rookie mistake. People will go do the pen test because they've got that compliance requirement because they're trying to be, ISO 27001 certified or whatever it may be, and they'll go run the pen test. And the moment the pen test is done, they go, "Glad that's over. We're done." And the reality is they're not actually done. They have to go fix everything now that they've got in there. All you've done is now is you've documented that you know about these problems, and that's really critical because you've got to make sure that you get the fixes in place to go protect the business. And again, the issue for a lot of folks is if you get compromised later, you can't come back and say, "We just didn't know." You knew. You got to make sure you put the fixes in place to go take care of it.
I love that. You can't say you didn't know. You literally knew. You have the receipts. All right. Hot take number 2. The most honest security metric is how fast you can prove a fix worked. Stop avoiding retesting. This sounds like it piggybacks on the last one. Tim, I'll hand this to you first. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of speaks for itself, right? That like the way to prove that a fix actually worked is to retest it. So, um, the a good pen test documents the methodology that was followed in order to identify a weakness, makes a recommendation as to how to remediate that weakness. So testing it with the exact same techniques again is the way to identify that you've remediated that weakness.
Nice. Nima, Martin, anything to add?
I give you kind of just two quick thoughts. One is you got to make sure that you measure what matters. So some of what you're measuring, it has to be important to the business, like your ability to detect and respond. How long is that taking? Are you quick enough? Those types of things. But there's a second piece of this too, which is kind of the continuous improvement piece, right? Even we all know that the first time you do one of these tests, it's not going to go well. Like that's just the way it is. But what's going to happen is if you make it a point to go through continuous improvement, you're checking the retesting. You're making sure that you did better this year than last year. You're reporting to the board. You're having the board hold those folks accountable. That's where you're going to see real improvement. So that continuous improvement piece is really critical.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is, I'd maybe add in a word. It's how fast you can prove a fix worked and how fast it was implemented. So, looping back to pen tests, if your penetration test comes back and you have, 10 critical vulnerabilities, which I would define as, substantial risk to the operation of your day-to-day business, that should be measured in the fastest time possible, right? Weeks to remediate issues that could bring your business to its knees is not an acceptable timeline. And going back to your board and saying, hey, we had this critical issue that could have taken off our entire knowledge management system. We found out about it and we got it fixed within 2 hours is a much stronger message.
hmm And speaking of metrics, we are going to jump to a hot take on metrics. And this one, I will hand over to Nima first. Security metrics should be CFO ready. Measure risk reduced per $1 spent, not alerts handled per day. Nima, what do you think?
Yeah, this is always one of the tricky ones for a lot of security people, is because a lot of the technical folks, they don't really speak business speak, and so to the hot take here, you've got to make sure that you're able to contextualize what we're doing from a security perspective into language that the rest of the business kind of understands. So building that POAM, that plan of action and milestones, where you have your risks, and then what you're doing to effectively kind of mitigate against them, how much you're spending against each one of those areas, and how much risk buy down that's going to give you. I think all of those are critical pieces to be able to go out and speak with the executive leadership team to understand, hey, we may be increasing spend, but here's what we're actually buying down the risk on, and we're protecting in these areas or those things. Because that's where a lot of this kind of comes into play. And again, what I encourage people to do is to start thinking about this in terms of layers. It's not just one little piece where you go target one particular risk. You've got to do layers of risk management across the board on some of this stuff.
Awesome. Martin, Tim, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that what specifically this looks like is going to be very industry dependent. If you're a small business looking to work with the Fortune 500, most of them are going to have some sort of vendor security questionnaire, and complying with that is really easy if you've already done the baseline things. And so if you're, a security manager at some, small organization, it's not, risk per dollar spent. It's, we can now go and bid at these big players and potentially land some big contracts. you know More recently, CMMC coming into effect. If you're a government contractor, a number of your contracts, you're just not going to be able to bid on that work. For many businesses in the DMV in particular, your business might be 100% covered by this. So hitting a security baseline is a requirement for doing 100% of your business. It is an enabler for every dollar that you're bringing in. So, it'll vary a little bit business by business, but definitely start to think through, security and IT as not just a cost center and as a way to reduce risk, but also as a business enabler.
That's a great point. Tim, anything to add?
I think this is probably going to lead into segue into the next section, but it's super important that people in kind of in all technical groups, but particularly in cyber, understand that the way that they get budget allocated is not by talking about how many alerts, not by talking about how bad it's literally by talking about what would happen if, and how would that impact the business. And the way that executive management understands that is dollars. And so whether it's as Martin's saying, lost opportunity to do business, or as Nima pointed out initially, like actual downtime, and it has to be communicated in that model. Otherwise, it's just noise to the execs. Oh, you guys are busy? Sorry.
I think and I agree with everything that was said, by the way. I think there's one other piece of it too, and this is more for the security pros out there. You've got to understand the way that your business operates, right? You have to understand what those critical business functions are. What are the servers or systems that support that? How do the processes work in the business? What are the critical things that support that? And then as you're making your case for whatever you need, you've got to tie your risk management pieces directly to the criticality of those functions. If you don't do that, you're again, to Tim's point, you're not really speaking in terms of business outcomes and business objectives. And so you're going to miss some of the executive kind of language that needs to be used there.
Yeah, I think that is, as Tim mentioned, the perfect way to segue into the last section here. We will do this whole section as a lightning round. We have a couple more hot takes to get to, and then we will finish up here. So hopefully we are about 5 minutes out from the end here. I know we promised you guys between 30 and 40 minutes, so we are still on track to make that. But let's get to our first leadership hot take here. Quarterly cyber briefings should change budget, not just feelings. You, Tim, and Nima, and Martin on this last one have been talking about this already. Do you have anything to add? Martin, I'll hand this one to you first.
Yeah, I think that it goes a little bit beyond just changing budget. I think it should also change kind of philosophy. I think that these kind of quarterly cyber briefings, a lot of organizations that I've been a part of, it's in our Zoom call, especially post COVID, that people are multitasking, they're sitting back, they're eating lunch, and it's just another calendar invite that they have to jump on. I think that the organizations that I see succeeding and avoiding these sorts of hefty investments in remediation are organizations that the leaders are engaged across all kind of verticals, and that can mean the people in legal or HR or IT are jumping in and engaging with the material in the briefings, as well as asking what else could I be doing. Oh, I see that we did a tabletop exercise this past quarter. How can I get involved in the next quarter when we do this again? um, you know I see that it took some extra time for remediations from our pen test to come through outside of our defined timeline for remediation for critical vulnerabilities. What could I have done to make that process go faster? How can I message with my team? All sorts of things like that. I think go even beyond budget to the kind of cultural change that we started out with discussing on kind of the training piece.
Yeah, that's a great point. Nima, Tim, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll be super kind of short. Yes, it should change budget. I would love to change feelings, but at the end of the day, I really want to make sure we're protecting the business. That's what's critical, and that's the most important goal.
So I think I'm going to split the two here and go at it from the direction. So Martin was looking at it more from the top down, the audience. I'm going to go from the other side as the person who is presenting these briefings. The single most important thing that can be included in the briefings is so what. For every executive that's on the briefing, it's important to let them know, what does this mean to you and the business as a whole. And if you can do that, then all the things that Martin talked about will happen.
Awesome. And I'll hand this next hot take right back to you, Tim. Again, reminder, let's do this lightning round style. There needs to be clearer board accountability for cybersecurity decisions. No single CISO can shield an organization from every threat. Tim, what do you think?
Well, I mean, our CISO aside, I think that no, it is. This does kind of also go back to the culture, though. If you think about it, right, the culture has to start at the board and percolate through the entirety of the organization. And when we talk about budgets and things like that, right, this is where those asks go to. And again, if it's incumbent on all the parties involved. So if I'm going to the board and I'm making an ask for an investment, I need to make it clear what the value of that investment is going to be. And things like we're too busy, we have too many alerts. That doesn't matter, right? It needs to be in the language that the board will understand.
Nima, as Data Prize CISO, I'll hand this one to you. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, in the old days, it used to be kind of hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. And what we've seen is that there were a number of very, very large business compromises that shifted the way that the boards have to engage and think about security. So again, in the old days, they didn't understand cybersecurity. And now a lot of times boards even have a cybersecurity SME, a former security leader on the board. So they're helping kind of bring some of that balance in the same way that you've got within the C-suite, the right level of balance between some of the different skills. We're seeing that also at a board level where you've got some security interest there because they understand this is about protecting the broader part of the business. And it is part of the sustainability of the business too. So it's just as important as, revenue or, people management or whatever there may be. So it's a fundamentally kind of different way of thinking about some of these problems that we've had in the past.
Yeah. Martin, anything to add?
Yeah, I think particularly thinking about larger enterprises with sort of regulatory requirements, I think that, in the early 2010s, we saw, a lot of shakeup in the CFO role, um, after the fraud and abuse that was going on. But I think that what kind of saved that role from going through the same turbulence that a CISO is kind of going through now is that the CFO is the one with the purse strings. And we've seen over the last like decade that the CISO role at Fortune 500 companies, the average tenure is under 2 years at most organizations, whereas for a CIO, it's like 5 or 6. And the reason is that the role comes with a ton of responsibility, but that responsibility needs to be shared across the organization, and that requires, be it the budgetary points that Nemo was bringing up earlier, or the cultural component that I was talking about to get everybody to buy in. I think it's a big problem, and one that large enterprises don't seem to have solved yet.
Mhm. That is a great point. All right, so we are on our very last take here. I think this is the hottest one of the bunch. So I will hand this one over to Nima first. Business leaders are hearing when, not if, from cyber leaders over and over, but secretly they keep thinking they're the if exception. So, Nima, do you agree that business leaders are saying to your face, yes, yes, of course, it's when, not if, but secretly they'd be pretty upset if they're not the exception?
Yeah, I'm talking with also a bunch of friends out in the industry and other security leaders in other parts of the world, and they are experiencing some of the same type of thing. And again, what we've kind of landed on is the core theme that a lot of these guys are running into is that we've got to be able to demonstrate business outcomes and business objectives, and we have to be able to speak that language. So for people that grew up kind of doing technical things and talking about security things, that's a fundamental kind of shift in the maturity and the growth of those businesses. And so I'm saying that because a lot of times modern kind of cyber leadership isn't about knowing those security tools. It's about building the right culture, building accountability, building resilience, and building relationships with other leaders in the company. And that's not stuff that's kind of traditionally being taught. A lot of times the junior ranks are being taught like understand this technical thing, understand this security jargon, and that's not the same kind of landscape that there was in the past.
Nice. Martin, Tim, anything to add?
I left them speechless.
Martin's not going to say anything. I will. So this one in particular to me just screams for talking about AI, and where I see that having this big impact is in the old days, companies were targets, organizations were targets, and so some nefarious actor somewhere had to think about, I want to target that organization. AI has lowered the bar sufficiently such that if you have an internet presence, you're a target, because it's no longer we have to, as attackers, invest a whole bunch of money into putting together an attack and trying to breach a company. Now it's, I don't even care how small the company is. I'm just looking for the weakest defenses to get in. And so, sure, it used to be a plausible defense for a small business owner to say, "Oh, I'm too small to be attacked. No one would care about me." And somebody still, likely would have. But now, nobody's even looking at your size. They're attacking the fact that you have even a single IP address on the internet. So, it's wishful thinking.
The only thing I'd add in there is I think it's also lowering the standards of organizations themselves with regards to their IT infrastructure, and it in this case meaning AI. I've talked with a number of potential clients over the last couple of years who have developed vibe coded SaaS applications, or they've built their company website, with AI tools, and it's, they didn't farm it out to experts like it would have been done 5 years ago. They kind of did it with a prompt and a prayer, if you will, and doing that with you know your reputation for your website or with customer data for a SaaS application, is a very risky endeavor.
I think
And
that's
one
a
that
great point.
I think that maybe even some of these organizations are not even thinking about, that they are, fingers crossed that they'll be the exception. They might just not know that there's a security risk. They went on, one of these AI website generators and clicked go and fiddled around, and they don't know that there's security flaws inherent in that.
That is a great point. So that brings us to the end of our session today. We are right on time here, maybe a couple seconds over. So, just very quickly, I will thank you, Nima, Tim, Martin, for sharing your unscripted thoughts with us. I hope you guys had fun. I had fun. I hope our audience had fun. If you're in the audience and you heard some of these hot takes and thought, oh boy, I have some work to be doing, then the good news is that Data Prize can help you with all of that work at every step of your security journey. We have solutions and experts who can get you where you need to be. Specifically, I will point out our vCISO services because if those hot takes made you realize you need help with things like setting priorities and communicating them to executives, our security advisory services are made for exactly that. And we are very good at delivering. So I will just end by giving one more thank you, and that's to our audience on the line today, especially if you are still here at the ripe old 42-minute mark. Thank you very much. If you submitted a question, we will get to it via email. If you submitted a hot take that we didn't get to, check out our social media and we will respond to them over there. You can scan this QR code or visit this link. We'll also send this out in the post-event email for a fun piece of content that we picked out for you that was developed by the team on the call here. So it's not marketing content. This is real security content from our security experts. We really suggest you check it out. And one last thank you to everybody for joining us. I will go ahead and close out this session. We hope you learned something new from today's event, and we will see you on the next one. Thanks all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.